As you enter Unit 4, we're going to be covering quite a bit of material as we look at America go through a world war, then on into a peacetime period, which really isn't much of a peacetime period, as we see America is going to be involved in a Cold War. And we're going to see a lot of social changes going on during this time period, from 1941 through the end of the 1960s. While America was going through a Great Depression and trying to figure out the answers here at home, Europe was seeing all kinds of problems as from the ashes of World War I and the problems of economic depression, dictators rose to power. First Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany. In the Pacific, Japan was looking to build its empire and spread its influence across the Pacific. And by the end of the 1930s, these nations were on the move. These Axis powers had united and were looking to achieve world dominance. America at first tries to remain an isolationist nation, allow the other countries to deal with it, but eventually, on December 7th, 1941, an attack at Pearl Harbor by the Empire of Japan would bring the United States into World War II. And once we were in the war, we were going to need to find ways to make America ready to take on these great powers. And so we're going to see here at home, America is going to be preparing its industrial machine to become the arsenal of democracy. Women will leave the homes and go to the factories. These Rosie the Riveters will help build the supplies we need to fight a war. We'll see the Great Migration as African Americans start moving from the South to northern cities to fill wartime jobs. We're going to see young men from America, of all ethnic groups, heading overseas to fight in Europe and in the Pacific to bring victory over Hitler and the Nazi powers and victory in Europe. And we're going to see the island hopping campaign as America moves from island to island across the Pacific and eventually is able to achieve victory over Japan. Of course, as you look at World War II, one of the things that eventually does bring victory over Japan is also going to bring on a new age. The atomic age, which we enter in on with the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is not only going to end World War II, but it's going to really be the beginning of a new Cold War with our former ally, the Soviet Union. Although we had been allies with them, we really never trusted them because, after all, they were communist. They didn't allow many freedoms within their country. Their economic system and their ideology is completely the opposite of what we believe in a democratic, capitalist America. And so we're going to see these superpowers squaring off and trying to compete for influence around the world throughout the rest of the 20th century. Back at home, as we enter the 1950s, it is the happy days. At least that's what Americans hope they'll be. Americans want to enjoy the fruits of victory. Young men coming home from war and their brides move to the suburbs, try to build a better life for their kids, this new baby boom generation which is being born. Although they're looking to enjoy a modern, new lifestyle in the suburbs and trying to have a good time, there are going to be things going on in the 50s which really kind of undermine the idea that it was such a happy time. First of all, there's the constant specter of all-out nuclear holocaust as the United States and the Soviet Union are squaring off with each other in this Cold War and building up our nuclear weapons. The Soviets launched Sputnik into space in 1957, which is not just scary that they beat us into space, but instead of strapping a satellite and shooting it up into our atmosphere, they could strap a nuclear bomb to it and shoot it across the ocean at us. We now have nuclear missiles as a threat in this Cold War. Another thing which is also causing unrest is the inequity here at home, which still has not been addressed. As African American young men came home from liberating people around the world, they came back to a segregated America. And the civil rights movement blossoms once again in the 1950s with incidents such as the ruling of Brown versus Board of Education and Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus. Eventually, the civil rights movement begins to grow and gain the attention of the nation. Leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. start to direct this movement. His policies of peaceful, nonviolent, civil disobedience and demonstration are the guiding force in the early part of this civil rights movement as African Americans start demanding civil rights. As we move on to the 1960s, though, we're going to see things become more turbulent, more troubled. In the 1960s, the threat of war with the Soviets reaches ahead with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we very nearly do end up in a war, the closest we ever come to all-out nuclear holocaust. We also see the growing crisis in Vietnam, and that war, eventually by the end of this decade of the 1960s, will be a controversial and heart-rending episode in American history. We're going to see leaders such as John F. Kennedy Jr., his brother Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. all assassinated during this troubled decade. The reforms which people are protesting for and pushing for, the counterculture movement which is seeking to challenge the values of young people, challenging the values of their parents and trying to change American society, all of this becomes more and more militant. And by the end of the 1960s, America is going through some very hard, troubling times. And these are the things you're going to be looking at as we go from World War II through the end of the 1960s.